Homeless woman returned a millionaire's lost briefcase. The opportunity he gave her changed an entire industry. Elena Brooks had been homeless for 11 months when she found the briefcase. It was lying beneath a bench outside Grand Central Station at 5:43 in the morning, half hidden behind a metal trash can and a pile of damp newspapers. The rain had stopped less than an hour earlier. Water still ran along the edge of the pavement, carrying cigarette filters, coffee lids, and fallen leaves toward a clogged drain. The city was beginning to wake around her. Delivery trucks groaned at intersections. A street cleaner pushed gray water across the sidewalk. Men in dark coats hurried toward office buildings without looking at anyone long enough to remember their faces. Elena sat beneath the station awning with her backpack pressed against her side. Everything she owned fit inside it. 2 shirts, 1 pair of clean socks, a toothbrush, a photograph of her daughter, a folded nursing certificate that was no longer valid, and a small plastic container holding $27.80. The briefcase was black leather, clean except for rain along one corner. It was the kind of object that did not belong near people sleeping beneath awnings. The brass locks reflected the streetlights. The handle looked almost new. Elena noticed it because everyone else walked past it. A man stepped over it while checking his phone. A woman nearly kicked it with the heel of her shoe and never looked down. Elena stared at it for several minutes. Her first thought was that someone would come back. Her second was that it might contain money. She hated herself for the second thought. She waited another 10 minutes. No one returned. Then she picked it up. The case was heavier than she expected. Not heavy enough to contain stacks of cash, but heavy enough to hold something valuable. She carried it into the station restroom, entered the farthest stall, and placed it on her knees. The locks were not secured. For a long moment, Elena kept her hands away from them. $27.80. That was enough for a sandwich, a cheap laundry cycle, and possibly one night in a crowded women's shelter if the temperature dropped again. She had not eaten since the previous afternoon. The heel of her left shoe was separating from the sole. Her coat had been donated by a church and was too large in the shoulders. She had spent the previous night sitting upright because the police had cleared the benches twice. She opened the briefcase. There was no cash. Inside were several folders, a silver laptop, 2 mobile phones, a sealed envelope, and a blue velvet box. Elena opened the box. A gold watch rested inside. She recognized the brand from a hospital patient she had once cared for. It had cost more than she earned in a year. She immediately closed the box. Then she saw the business cards. Adrian Vale, founder and chief executive officer, Vale Health Systems. Elena read the name twice. She knew the company. Everyone who had worked in a hospital knew it. Vale Health Systems manufactured diagnostic equipment, patient monitoring technology, hospital software, and medical supply systems. Its machines appeared in emergency rooms, surgical centers, and private clinics across the country. Elena had used Vale equipment when she worked as a nurse, back when she still had a home, back when people called her Ms. Brooks instead of ma'am. Move along. She removed one of the cards and looked at the number. The station had public charging outlets near the waiting area, but she did not own a phone. One of the phones inside the briefcase lit up. 32 missed calls. A message appeared across the screen. Mr. Vale, security is waiting at the hotel. Please call immediately. Elena locked the briefcase and carried it to the information desk. A uniformed employee looked at her coat, her damp hair, and the backpack hanging from her shoulder. "You can't leave bags here," he said before she finished speaking. "I found this outside." "Then take it to the police." "It belongs to Adrian Vale." The employee's expression changed. "Adrian Vale?" "Yes." He reached for the case. Elena did not release it. "I want a receipt." "A receipt?" "Something proving I turned it in." He looked offended. "I work for the station. That doesn't answer me." People had stopped listening to Elena months earlier. They interrupted her at shelters. They dismissed her at employment offices. They spoke around her in hospitals. But homelessness had taught her something she had never needed to learn before. If you possessed the only thing another person needed, they would eventually hear you. The employee stared at her. Then he called station security. 20 minutes later, Elena was sitting in a small office beside two transit police officers while a station supervisor examined the business card. One officer asked where she found the briefcase. Elena told him. He asked whether she had opened it. She said yes. The second officer looked toward the case. Was anything removed? No. You expect us to take your word for that? Elena looked at him. You can check the cameras. The door opened before he responded. 3 men entered. The first wore a dark suit and an earpiece. The second carried a tablet. The third looked as though he had not slept. He was in his late 40s, tall, with silver beginning at his temples, and the controlled expression of someone accustomed to solving problems before anyone else noticed them. Elena recognized him from magazine covers. Adrian Vale. He looked at the briefcase first, then at her. Where did you find it? Outside the east entrance. Was it open? No. Did you open it? Yes. One of the security men stepped forward. Adrian raised a hand. What did you see? Files, a laptop, 2 phones, a watch. The envelope. I did not open it. Why not? It was sealed. Adrian looked at her for several seconds. Then he took the briefcase, opened it, and examined the contents. He counted nothing aloud. He checked the laptop, the envelope, and the velvet box. Then he removed a slim folder and opened it. His shoulders loosened. Everything was there. The station supervisor smiled in relief. Excellent. We're glad we could help recover. She found it, Adrian said. The man stopped speaking. Adrian looked back at Elena. What is your name? Elena Brooks. Ms. Brooks, do you understand what was inside this case? No. Documents related to a company acquisition, confidential research, access devices, personal property. I understood it was important. You could have sold the watch. Probably. You could have sold the laptop. Probably not without getting arrested. The corner of Adrian's mouth moved slightly. One of the officers did not smile. Adrian removed a money clip from his coat and counted several bills. Elena saw hundreds. He held them toward her. Please take this. Her body reacted before her pride did. Her eyes went directly to the money, food, a motel room, new shoes, maybe a prepaid phone, maybe enough to begin feeling human again. She hated that everyone in the room saw her calculate it. Elena did not reach for the bills. I returned it because it was yours. I understand. Then say thank you. The room became still. The station supervisor looked horrified. Adrian slowly lowered the money. Thank you, Ms. Brooks. You're welcome. He studied her coat, her worn shoes, and the backpack she had not set down. Do you have somewhere to go? That is not related to your briefcase. No, it isn't. He put the money away. Then he removed a card and wrote something on the back. This is the address of my office. Come at 10 this morning. For what? A conversation. About what? I don't know yet. Elena gave a tired laugh. Men like you usually know. Not always. She looked at the card. Is this a job interview? No. Then why would I come? Because you returned something worth millions when you needed money. That doesn't make me qualified to work for your company. No, Adrian said, but it makes me curious. Elena almost refused. Curiosity from wealthy people rarely benefited poor people. Sometimes it became charity. Sometimes it became a story they told at dinner. Sometimes it became a photograph attached to a company newsletter. She had no interest in becoming evidence that a millionaire had compassion. Then she looked at the address, Vale Tower, 42nd floor, 10 in the morning. She had nowhere else she needed to be. I'll come, she said. Adrian nodded. His security team left with him. The station supervisor suddenly became polite. He offered Elena coffee. She declined. When she stepped back onto the street, the sun was rising between the buildings. She still had $27.80. She also had 4 hours to become presentable enough to enter a tower where the lobby probably cost more than every home she had ever lived in. Elena spent $6 at a laundromat. She washed one blouse and the least damaged pair of trousers in her backpack. She cleaned herself in a public restroom, pulled her hair back, and used a sewing kit borrowed from the laundromat attendant to repair the loose heel of her shoe. At 9:30, she stood across from Vale Tower. The building was all glass and steel, rising above the avenue with the cold confidence of something built to make ordinary people feel small. Employees moved through revolving doors carrying laptops and coffee. Elena watched them for 5 minutes. Then she crossed the street. The security guard at the desk looked at her clothes. "I have an appointment with Adrian Vale." "Name?" "Elena Brooks." His fingers moved across the keyboard. His expression changed. "Yes, Ms. Brooks, 42nd floor." A woman in a gray suit appeared almost immediately. "Ms. Brooks, I'm Caroline Reed, Mr. Vale's executive assistant." She extended her hand. Elena hesitated, then shook it. Caroline did not pull away quickly. She led Elena toward the elevator as though escorting her were completely normal. That small act almost broke something inside her. The 42nd floor was quieter than the lobby. There were glass offices, pale wooden walls, and windows overlooking half the city. Caroline offered coffee, tea, and breakfast. Elena said no. Her stomach tightened loudly enough for both women to hear. Caroline pretended not to notice. "Mr. Vale is finishing a call. I'll bring something in." 5 minutes later, a tray appeared with eggs, toast, fruit, and coffee. Elena ate slowly at first, then faster. She forced herself to leave half the toast untouched. Adrian entered while she was drinking coffee. He had changed suits. His lost briefcase rested on the table beside him. "Thank you for coming. You said you wanted a conversation." "I do." He sat across from her. "What did you do before?" "Before what?" "Before you started carrying everything you own." Elena's fingers tightened around the cup. "You notice details. It is part of my work. I was a nurse." "What kind?" "Emergency department, then patient discharge coordination." "For how long?" 14 years. "Why did you stop?" "I didn't stop." She looked toward the windows. "My hospital merged with a private network. They automated discharge planning, cut staff, and moved the remaining nurses into rotating roles. I was injured lifting a patient 6 months later. My leave expired before I recovered. Then my mother got sick." Adrian waited. "She had dementia. I moved her into my apartment. I spent my savings on private care after insurance refused several services. I missed rent. I fell behind on everything. She died. I was evicted 2 weeks later." "No family?" "A daughter." "Where is she?" "With her father in Ohio." "Does she know?" "That I'm homeless?" "Yes." "No." "Why?" "Because she is 17. That is old enough to understand. It is also old enough to leave school and try to save me." Adrian leaned back. "You think she would?" "I know she would." "So you disappeared." "I told her I was working in another state." "Do you speak?" "Every Sunday." "What do you tell her?" "That work is busy." He looked at Elena for a long moment. She hated the conversation, not because his questions were cruel, because they were precise. He was not giving her the comfort of vague sympathy. He wanted the architecture of her collapse, and Elena knew how that looked from the outside. A series of bad decisions, a woman who used her savings, a mother who took too much responsibility, an employee who failed to protect herself, a tenant who could not pay. Homelessness had taught her that most people believe disaster arrived in one dramatic moment. Usually it came through paperwork, a denied claim, a missed deadline, a fee, a policy written by someone who would never meet the person it destroyed. Adrian opened a folder. "Do you remember using ValeCare discharge software?" "Yes." "What did you think of it?" Elena looked at him. "You invited me here to discuss software?" I invited you because you worked inside hospitals and because you say what you think. Your discharge software was expensive, complicated, and designed by people who had never discharged a patient. Caroline, who had entered quietly with a second coffee, stopped near the door. Adrian's expression did not change. Be specific. It tracked forms. It did not track reality. What does that mean? It told us whether a patient received instructions. It did not tell us whether the patient understood them. It recorded transportation plans but did not verify if the person had money for a taxi. It confirmed that prescriptions were sent but not whether the pharmacy was open or the medication was affordable. That is the hospital's responsibility. No, that is what every technology company says when its product fails after the sale. Caroline looked toward Adrian. Elena continued. A 74-year-old patient can sign a digital form without understanding a single line. The software marks the task complete. The hospital looks efficient. Then the patient goes home, takes the wrong medication, falls, and returns through the emergency room 2 days later. Did that happen? Every week. Our data showed improved discharge compliance. Your data showed completed boxes. Adrian was quiet. Elena felt anger rising now, the kind she had carried for years. Your company builds systems for patients you never see. Hospitals buy them because executives want dashboards. Nurses use them because they are ordered to. Patients suffer inside the gaps between what the system records and what actually happens. Adrian closed the folder. Would you tell that to my product team? Why? Because they have been developing a new patient transition platform for 18 months. And you want a homeless former nurse to insult them. I want someone to tell them what they missed. What happens after that? That depends on what you say. Elena laughed once. You still haven't offered me a job. No. Why not? Because I don't know what job to offer. He pressed a button on the conference phone. Caroline, ask Martin, Priya, and the transition team to meet us in Lab 3 in 20 minutes. Caroline nodded and left. Elena stared at him. You're serious? Yes. I have not worked in a hospital for almost 2 years. That may make you more useful. How? You have seen what happens when systems fail outside the building. Lab 3 occupied most of the 38th floor. It looked less like a medical facility than an expensive technology showroom. Large screens displayed patient charts. Tablets were arranged beside hospital beds. Designers and engineers stood around a central table covered with diagrams. There were 12 people in the room. Every one of them looked at Elena when Adrian entered beside her. Adrian introduced her without mentioning the station. This is Elena Brooks, 14 years in emergency care and discharge coordination. She is reviewing the transition platform. A man with a narrow face and expensive glasses stepped forward. I'm Martin Keller, Senior Vice President of Product Development. He shook Elena's hand. His smile was professional but confused. Priya Shah, the lead systems engineer, seemed more interested. What would you like to see first? Priya asked. Show me what happens when a patient is discharged. They demonstrated the system. A nurse selected the diagnosis. The software generated instructions. Medication schedules appeared on a mobile application. Transportation options linked to external services. Follow-up appointments could be scheduled automatically. The platform was elegant, fast, impressive, and in Elena's opinion, dangerously optimistic. What if the patient has no smartphone? She asked. Martin answered first. We offer printed instructions. What if the patient cannot read? The nurse can review them verbally. What if the nurse is managing 6 discharges? The hospital should maintain adequate staffing. Several people shifted. Elena looked at him. Have you ever worked a discharge desk? No, but we consulted. How many of your consultants were working nurses? Martin glanced toward a colleague. 3. Currently working? I believe so. How many came from underfunded hospitals? No one answered. Elena pointed toward the medication screen. What if the patient cannot afford this prescription? The platform can display generic alternatives. Can it verify insurance coverage before the patient leaves? Priya spoke. Not currently. Can it alert the nurse that the nearest pharmacy closes in 20 minutes? No. Can it identify that the patient lives alone? Yes. Can it ask whether they can climb the stairs to their apartment? No. Can it show that a patient has been discharged 3 times in 6 months for the same condition? Yes. What does it do with that information? Martin's voice tightened. It flags the record. For whom? The clinical team. And then, the hospital determines intervention. So it gives another warning to people already overwhelmed. Martin crossed his arms. With respect, no system can solve every social problem. No, Elena said, but it should stop pretending social problems are not medical problems. The room became quiet. Adrian stood near the back wall, watching. Elena moved toward the screen. You built this around the moment the patient leaves the hospital. That is what discharge software does, Martin said. That is why it fails. Priya looked at Elena carefully. What should it be built around? The 7 days after discharge. She picked up a marker. For the next 40 minutes, Elena described what she had seen in hospitals. Patients returning because they misunderstood instructions. Elderly people missing appointments because transportation never arrived. Diabetic patients unable to refrigerate insulin. Parents choosing between prescriptions and groceries. People discharged into apartments without elevators. Patients listed as non-compliant when the actual problem was poverty, language, fear, or loneliness. She drew a timeline on the board. 48 hours before discharge, the day of discharge, the first night home, the first 3 days, the first week. Every transition plan should ask 5 questions, she said. Can the patient understand the instructions? Can they obtain the medication? Can they reach the follow-up appointment? Is the home safe for recovery? Is there a real person who can help if something goes wrong? Priya began writing notes. Martin did not. One younger engineer raised his hand before seeming embarrassed by the gesture. How would the system verify those things? You do not verify everything with one screen, Elena said. You connect the people who already know parts of the answer. She pointed at the board. The nurse knows the medical risk. The pharmacy knows whether medication is collected. Transportation services know whether a ride arrived. Social workers know whether the patient has support. Family members know whether the person is actually eating, sleeping, and taking medication. Privacy regulations make that difficult, Martin said. Difficult is not the same as impossible. Adrian finally spoke. How long would it take to redesign the platform around this? Martin answered immediately. Months, possibly a year, and it would increase implementation costs significantly. Priya shook her head. A basic version could be prototyped in 12 weeks. Martin turned toward her. Not at enterprise scale. I said a prototype. Adrian looked at Elena. Would you stay for 12 weeks? She stared at him. Doing what? Working with the team. As a consultant? Yes. I don't have a home. We can arrange temporary housing. I don't own a computer. We manufacture them. Several people smiled. Martin did not. Elena looked around the room. She had entered the building hungry. Now a billionaire was asking her to help redesign technology used by hospitals across the country. It felt unreal. That made it dangerous. What happens after 12 weeks? Adrian answered honestly. If the idea fails, the contract ends. And if it works? Then we decide what comes next. How much? Caroline handed her a page. Elena read the number twice. It was more money than she had earned in 6 months as a nurse. For 12 weeks? Yes, Adrian said. Elena folded the page. I want one condition. Martin exhaled quietly. Adrian noticed. What condition? I speak to actual patients, not selected success stories, not people trained by your marketing department. Patients who return to the hospital after discharge. That can be arranged. And nurses. Yes. Working nurses, night shifts, public hospitals, rural hospitals. Yes. Elena looked at Martin. And he doesn't get to remove me because I make meetings uncomfortable. Martin's face reddened. Adrian almost smiled. Agreed. The temporary apartment was on the west side of Manhattan. It had one bedroom, a small kitchen, clean sheets, and a view of a brick wall. Elena stood inside for nearly an hour before sitting down. She opened cabinets. She checked the locks 3 times. She turned on the shower and watched hot water run. Then she called her daughter. Mom? Hi, Lily. You sound strange. I have something to tell you. Elena sat on the bathroom floor because it felt more stable than the bed. She told her everything, the injury, the debt, the eviction, the shelters, the station, the briefcase. There was silence on the line. Then Lily began crying. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to finish school. I thought you didn't want me. Elena closed her eyes. No. You stopped visiting? I was ashamed. I would have helped. I know. That was not your decision to make alone. The words hurt because they were true. Elena pressed her palm against the floor. I'm sorry. Lily cried for several minutes. Then she asked for the address. Elena gave it to her. You're coming home, Lily said. I have work here. After that, we'll talk. No, you always say that when you don't want to promise. Elena looked around the apartment. I promise we'll make a plan together. It was not enough, but it was honest. Elena began work the next morning. The Vale team called the project Bridge. Martin wanted a more sophisticated name. Adrian chose Bridge. For 12 weeks, Elena traveled through hospitals. She sat beside nurses during midnight discharges. She watched families struggle with online forms. She visited patients at home. She rode with medical transport drivers. She spoke to pharmacists, social workers, home health aides, and emergency physicians. She recorded every failure. A widower discharged after heart surgery who did not understand that 2 medications with different names contained the same active ingredient. A woman with pneumonia who missed follow-up because the clinic's scheduling system booked her at a location 40 miles away. A man who returned to the emergency room because his apartment had no heat. A mother who diluted her child's medication to make it last longer. The more Elena saw, the less patient she became with corporate language. Martin described barriers. Elena called them reasons people return to hospitals. The legal department described risk exposure. Elena described patients dying alone. Marketing wanted language about empowering health journeys. Elena removed the phrase from every document she touched. Priya became her closest ally. She was 35, brilliant, and direct. She had designed medical systems for years but had spent little time inside hospitals. I thought the problem was information, Priya admitted one night. They were sitting in the lab at nearly midnight, surrounded by screens. It is, Elena said, but not missing information. No, information is everywhere. The problem is that no one owns what happens next. Elena nodded. That is the entire problem. The Bridge prototype did not simply produce discharge instructions, it created a recovery plan. Before a patient left the hospital, the system identified medication access, transportation, home safety, language needs, cognitive risks, and available support. It scheduled check-ins based on risk. Low-risk patients received automated messages. Moderate-risk patients received calls from trained coordinators. High-risk patients were assigned a human navigator who followed the case for 7 days. The program connected pharmacies, clinics, transport services, and approved family contacts. Most importantly, it refused to mark discharge complete simply because paperwork was signed. Martin fought nearly every change. It is too expensive. It creates liability. Hospitals will not pay. This is outside our core product. Elena answered him the same way each time. Then your core product is incomplete. The first pilot launched at St. Matthew's Medical Center. a public hospital with overcrowded wards and one of the highest 30-day readmission rates in the region. The hospital administrator agreed because Vail covered the cost. The nurses agreed because Elena asked them directly. For the first 2 weeks, almost everything went wrong. The pharmacy connection failed. Patients ignored automated calls. Transport companies sent inconsistent updates. The hospital's network crashed twice. One patient navigator quit after 4 days. Martin documented every failure. Elena did too, but they interpreted them differently. Martin saw evidence the project should stop. Elena saw the reason it needed to exist. At the end of the first month, readmissions had not improved. Adrian called a meeting. The board wanted the pilot paused. Martin presented 17 slides explaining why Bridge was operationally unsustainable. When he finished, Adrian looked at Elena. "What do you think?" "It is failing." Martin leaned back satisfied. Elena continued. "Because we designed it like software." Priya looked at her. "What does that mean?" "We assumed people would use it because it was available. Patients don't need another platform. They need someone they trust." She placed a stack of interview notes on the table. Patients answered calls when the same person contacted them twice. They followed medication instructions when the navigator introduced himself before discharge. Family members participated when we explained their role face-to-face. "We cannot assign personal navigators to every patient," Martin said. "We don't need to." Elena displayed a new model. "Use trained community health workers for high-risk cases, people from the same neighborhoods, people who understand the language, transportation, housing, and local pharmacies." "That is a service company," Martin said. "We are a technology company." "Then become both." The room went silent. One board member laughed softly as if Elena had suggested they manufacture groceries. Adrian did not. "How many navigators would the hospital need?" 8 for the pilot population. "Cost." Priya gave the estimate. It was significant. Less than the average cost of 10 avoidable hospital readmissions. Adrian looked at the board. "Continue the pilot." Martin closed his folder. The second month changed everything. St. Matthew's hired 8 community navigators through the Bridge program. 1 was a retired paramedic. 2 were bilingual home health aides. 1 had previously worked at a pharmacy. Another had cared for her father through cancer treatment. They met high-risk patients before discharge. They called the next morning. They visited homes when necessary. They solved problems the software could not. A navigator discovered that a heart patient was cutting pills in half to save money. Another found an elderly woman sleeping in a chair because her bedroom was upstairs. 1 arranged same-day transportation to a dialysis center. Another contacted a landlord when a recovering patient's apartment had no running water. The technology tracked the plan. The people made it real. At the end of 90 days, 30-day readmissions among high-risk discharge patients had fallen by 31%. Medication collection improved by 44%. Missed follow-up appointments dropped by nearly half. The hospital saved more money than the pilot cost. The results spread through the industry. At first, other companies dismissed them. Then hospital executives began calling. Vail's competitors announced their own patient transition initiatives. Medical journals requested data. Investors asked whether Bridge could become a separate business division. Adrian offered Elena a permanent position, Vice President of Patient Transition Strategy. She looked at the contract in his office. "I don't have a degree beyond nursing school." "You have results." "I have no corporate experience." "You have survived corporate decisions." "That is not the same thing." "No," Adrian said. "It may be more useful." She looked at the salary, then at the stock options. It was more money than she knew how to imagine. "What does Martin think?" "He thinks I'm making an emotional decision." "Are you?" "Yes." Elena looked up. Adrian continued. "I am emotionally opposed to letting a successful product disappear because the person who created the idea lacks the usual resume." Elena almost smiled. I didn't create it alone. I know. Priya needs authority over technical development. She will have it. The navigators cannot become temporary contractors with no benefits. We can discuss the structure. No, we decide before I sign. Adrian leaned back. You negotiate aggressively for someone who arrived here without shoes that stayed closed. Elena held his gaze. That woman had less to lose. He nodded slowly. Full benefits, training, promotion paths. And a patient advisory council. Agreed. And hospitals cannot buy only the software. That may reduce sales. It will prevent them from using the platform as another box-checking system. Adrian was quiet. Then he reached for a pen. Add it. Elena signed. 1 year later, Bridge operated in 27 hospitals. 2 years later, it served more than 1 million patients. Vale created thousands of navigator jobs across the country. Many were filled by former caregivers, medical assistants, displaced nurses, and people who understood communities because they lived inside them. Readmission rates fell wherever the program was fully implemented. Hospitals began treating transportation, food access, home safety, and medication affordability as measurable parts of recovery rather than inconvenient social details. Competitors were forced to change. Insurance companies began reimbursing transition navigation because the numbers proved it saved money. Medical schools added patient transition systems to administration courses. State regulators adopted new discharge standards based partly on the Bridge model. An entire industry that had once measured success by signed forms began measuring whether patients actually recovered. Elena became one of the most influential voices in healthcare technology. She hated interviews, she hated magazine photographs, she especially hated headlines describing her as a homeless woman saved by a millionaire. Whenever a reporter used that phrase, she corrected it. He gave me access, she said. That is not the same as saving me. Lily moved to New York after graduation. She studied public health. Their relationship did not repair itself immediately. There were angry conversations, long silences, questions Elena could not answer without admitting how deeply shame had controlled her. But they kept speaking. That mattered. Samuel Vale Health's original board members eventually stopped referring to Bridge as Adrian's charitable experiment. The division became one of the company's most profitable operations. Martin Keller resigned after Bridge's 3rd year. He accepted a position at a competing firm and announced that he would lead its new human-centered care division. Priya sent Elena the article. He finally agrees with us, she wrote. Elena replied, Profit improves memory. 5 years after she found the briefcase, Elena stood on a stage at the National Healthcare Innovation Conference. Thousands of hospital leaders, technology executives, nurses, regulators, and investors filled the hall. Behind her, a screen displayed the faces of patients who had been helped by Bridge. Elena did not speak about software first. She spoke about a man named Harold who nearly died because he could not afford a taxi, a woman named Celeste who signed instructions she could not read, a mother named Dana who diluted antibiotics because no one asked whether she could pay for the refill. Then she displayed a photograph of a hospital discharge form. Every box was checked. The system said these patients were ready, Elena told the audience. Reality said otherwise. She paused. I was homeless when I entered this industry from the other side. I already knew that forms could be complete while a life was falling apart. The hall was silent. Healthcare did not fail because no one cared. It failed because every person completed their own task and assumed someone else was responsible for what happened next. After the speech, Adrian found her backstage. He carried the same black briefcase. The leather had been repaired along one corner. You still use it? Elena asked. I am more careful now. You should be. He handed it to her. What is this? Open it. Inside was the blue velvet box. The gold watch remained inside. Beside it was a framed copy of the first Bridge pilot report and a company document. Elena read the first page. Adrian had transferred a portion of his personal shares in the bridge division into an independent employee and patient trust. The trust would fund navigator education, patient emergency support, and innovation grants for frontline healthcare workers. Elena looked up. How much is this worth? Today, several hundred million. She stared at him. You put it in a trust? You said patients needed ownership in what happens next. I meant their recovery plans. I decided to interpret it broadly. Elena turned another page. Her name appeared as founding chair. I didn't agree to this. That is why these are draft documents. She looked at him. 5 years ago, you tried to hand me cash in a station office. I remember. I almost took it. I know. I hated you for making me look at it. I know that too. She touched the edge of the briefcase. Why did you ask me to come to your office? Adrian was quiet for a moment. My wife died after being discharged from a private hospital. Elena looked at him. He had never told her. She had a minor procedure, he continued. There were complications. The instructions were technically correct. The follow-up was scheduled. Every system showed that the transition had been completed properly. What happened? She misunderstood the medication schedule. I was traveling. No one called until she missed the follow-up appointment. Elena lowered her eyes. I'm sorry. So was I, but regret is not a strategy. He looked at the pilot report inside the case. When you criticized our software, you described what happened to her without knowing her name. That is why you continued the project. That is why I listened. Elena closed the briefcase. And the trust? That is because Bridge became larger than either of us. 2 months later, the Bridge Patient Trust launched publicly. It funded emergency transportation, medication assistance, home modifications, and community navigator training. Employees across Vale Health received ownership units. Patients and frontline workers held permanent seats on its governing council. Other companies copied the model. Several resisted at first. Then hospitals began preferring vendors that included patient support and community employment in their contracts. The entire healthcare technology sector shifted. Success was no longer measured only by software licenses, processing speed, and administrative efficiency. Companies competed over recovery rates, patient understanding, medication access, and real-world outcomes. Elena watched the change with cautious satisfaction. She knew industries did not become compassionate. They responded to incentives, laws, evidence, pressure, and profit. But if the right structure made doing good more valuable than ignoring harm, she was willing to use it. 10 years after finding the briefcase, Elena returned to Grand Central Station before sunrise. She wore a dark wool coat and comfortable leather shoes. The station had been renovated. The old bench was gone. The trash can had been moved. The city around it remained impatient. People rushed through the entrances without looking down. Elena stood beneath the awning where she had once slept with her backpack against her chest. Lily stood beside her. She was now a physician working in community medicine. Was it here? Lily asked. Near here. And you really considered selling the watch? For about 30 seconds. I would have sold it. No, you wouldn't. You don't know that. Elena smiled. I know you. A black car waited at the curb to take them to the 1000th Bridge-supported patient center. Before they left, Elena noticed a woman sitting near the station wall. She appeared to be in her early 30s. A suitcase rested beside her. She was holding several documents and staring at them with the expression of someone trying to understand how a normal life had disappeared so quickly. Elena approached slowly. Are you all right? The woman looked up, suspicious. I'm fine. Elena recognized the answer. She had used it hundreds of times. Do you need somewhere safe to sit? I said I'm fine. Elena nodded. She reached into her coat but stopped before taking out money. Instead, she removed a card. The Bridge Patient Trust operated a 24-hour recovery and housing center 3 blocks away. It had showers, medical staff, employment advisors, and private rooms for women in crisis. Elena placed the card on the suitcase. They will not ask you to prove you deserve help. The woman looked at the card. Why are you doing this? Elena glanced toward the station entrance. Someone once gave me an opportunity before he understood what I could become. The woman looked at Elena's coat, the waiting car, and the name printed on the card. Are you Elena Brooks? Elena nodded. I saw you on television. That was probably a mistake. The woman smiled slightly. Elena stepped away. As she walked toward the car, Lily looked at her. You could have given her money. I could have. Why didn't you? Money might solve this morning. And the center. It might help her build the next one. They entered the car. Grand Central disappeared behind them as the city brightened. Elena thought about the briefcase. For years, people had told the story as though returning it had changed her life. That was true, but it was incomplete. The briefcase had not rescued her. The opportunity had not transformed her because Adrian Vale was wealthy or because Elena was honest. It transformed her because for the first time after losing everything, someone did not look only at what she lacked. He asked what she knew. Then he gave her access to a room where that knowledge mattered. Elena had entered that room with no home, no valid nursing license, no corporate title, and no reason to believe anyone would listen. 10 years later, the industry listened to patients before declaring them ready. It employed people from the communities it served. It measured recovery beyond the hospital door, and thousands of people returned home more safely because a woman sleeping outside a train station had understood something powerful executives had overlooked. A completed process was not the same as a completed responsibility. The black briefcase remained in Adrian's office. The gold watch remained inside it. He never wore it. Whenever a new executive asked why it was displayed beneath glass, Adrian told them the truth. It contains the most valuable thing our company ever lost. They usually assumed he meant the confidential documents. He never corrected them immediately. He waited until they asked a second question. Then he pointed toward the first bridge report beside it. No, he said. The valuable thing was the perspective we had ignored. And across the city, Elena Brooks began another morning not as the homeless woman who had returned a millionaire's property, but as the woman who had forced an industry to understand that dignity was not charity, it was infrastructure.